So excited for that. So let's get it started.
Hey,
Dylan, or Brittany, do you want to go first?
sure, yeah. I just wanted to give a round of applause for that opening intro. That was amazing. Thanks for that. I feel well prepared for this call. But yeah, I could dive through some community stuff real quick. I will have to mute for a little bit, so that would be cool. But yeah, on the community side, we have had lots of interest in committees in general. So I did put out a coordination link. It's called Let Us Meet. It's over in the committees channel. So if you have any interest in committees or in being part of a committee or anything like that, we're going to try and host a call next week. Finally, I've put that together, so I'm going to go just based on the best availability to get the most people on that call. So please go fill that out and indicate your availability if that's something that interests you. Next up on my agenda is like a quick PSA safety announcement. The number of Discord hacks seems to be going up rather than down, which is a scary thing. So I just wanted to remind everybody, please don't accept DMs from people that you don't know, and people that you do know. If you have the ability, try to verify that it's actually them some other way. If they've sent you something that you're not sure about or seems out of character, always double check links. Make sure that the domain of the link is what you expect it to be. Check for spelling errors. Just be very careful. If there's a chance that it's suspicious at all, don't click on it. Confirm. It's never silly. It's never stupid. It's just a safety precaution that everybody should be taking. So, yeah, just wanted to remind folks about that. If having a call more in depth that's just safety focused, if that's of interest to people, please indicate somewhere in the chat. If we get enough support for that, maybe I'll host a safety call for folks as well. What else? I'm about to post on Snapshot a proposal for retroactive community moderator compensation for the folks who have been hustling around here for the past many months. So keep an eye out on Snapshot for that. And I think that's it from me on the like strictly community side. It is maybe worth noting that we were down for part of the day, not yesterday, but the day before, for the Optimism Bedrock update. And so it took a little while to get back online, and there were some like changes that were not expected. So we had to do some updates on the bridge, but I think those are all starting to work their way through. So routes to and from Optimism should be operating more normally now, for anybody who might have run into problems there. I think that might be it from me on the community side. Any other questions? I'll take a quick look at the chat, but if you want to, you can. I'll bounce the ball over to Dylan. GM Dylan, how are you?
Hey guys, all good. How are you?
Phenomenal.
Great stuff. Yeah, so Amanda kind of gave a good little kind of intro on some of the cool stuff we've been seeing in the data, but yeah, we've definitely been doing well over the last little while. And I suppose like that kind of like DeFi Llama page that I linked last time, I'll put it in here again so you guys can check it out. But it's an interesting one to keep an eye on. We actually have been doing some really cool stuff, kind of like with our own internal data in a similar sort of vein. I'm not sure totally what we can share and what we can't share just yet, but we've basically undertook this massive project that's really starting to just pay dividends because finally got it to a point where it's functional. I kind of want to, I'll give you like a sneak kind of peek or a bit of insight from that, but do you know the way we always go around shouting about how fast we are? Yeah, when you look at that actually in comparison to everybody else, it's ridiculous how clear it is. Like our median fill time, like across all chains and tokens that we support, is 78 seconds. The next like closest person to us is like Seller, and they're like 2 minutes. The next one after that, Synapse, 4 minutes, Hop, 6 minutes, Multichain, 8 minutes, Stargate, 11 minutes. It's it's impressive to say the least, and I think that's like really speaks kind of volumes as to how our kind of like relayer system works very, very well. and how like when you incentivize people in the right sort of way and you make capital available from more than just the LP pool, like enable faster bridging, that really pays off for the long sort of term. So it's yeah, just kind of a credit to how much thought went into the design process of Cross, and then yeah, that's kind of to the user sort of benefit. And like I'm seeing like posts on Twitter and everything like that from people who maybe haven't used the bridge before, just like actually reaching out and commenting and saying like how good a user experience it was. So yeah, I know I'm kind of tooting our own horn here, but like it really is being evidenced in both the data side of things and like anecdotal pieces that we're seeing from people on Twitter. Um, Chase, I noticed, just joined the call there. I just kind of gave the guys a little bit of a rundown on how fast we are when we look at things in terms of fill times. I
Yeah,
kind of
pretty
mentioned
damn
that
fast, huh?
yeah, it's insane. Um, but yeah, anything else that you think the guys might benefit from if they knew about?
No, I think that's the thing we were most excited about. Sorry, I'm a little late. I had a screaming baby, and he only wanted dad at 5 minutes. But
Fair.
crisis handled. And yeah, relay or fill times, I think is just like it's kind of just like mind blowing. Like you look at certain routes, so lots of people are able to do certain directions fast, and maybe you already talked about this, but there's certain directions where
Hmm.
like 5 to 10x faster than like our closest competitor. It's kind of like I don't know. Yeah, like you said, a testament to I think some of the design that went into Across and the power of having kind of these like actually decentralizing.
Do
Yeah.
we, quick question, do we have any metrics on connects? They were also somewhat relay based, right? Or are we the only
Yeah,
one?
they're definitely relayer based. We don't have any recent metrics on them. Kind of to put that in perspective, they're doing like $7 million a week right now, and so we're doing kind of like 25 to 50, 50 on
Yeah,
a good week, and so um, we haven't been tracking them as closely as we should, but that's kind of on the roadmap.
I
Um,
see.
yeah, they've made some updates to their system. We were talking about this a little bit, but like there's definitely some ideas that I don't know again whether it came from us. I like to think so. They've definitely moved closer to the design of a cross than their previous was. And I think again, they're flattering.
Cool. Yeah, that makes sense. Thanks for sharing.
Yeah, other than that, I'm not really sure if there's anything else we can talk about. That was kind of your sneak peek for the week. What I would say is I actually had multiple different members of the team kind of reach out and mention that keeping an eye on the bridge volumes flowing through the space is very much like having your finger on the pulse of DeFi. So yeah, for any of you out there who like to get a little bit of alpha earlier than everybody else, it's definitely one to keep an eye on. And just have a play around with it. It's cool to kind of understand how things flow through various different chains. Like go click on a cross and see like what volumes are flowing to where and from where. You'll get a very good idea as to like what's hot and what's not in terms of different ecosystems, and you can see does that like align with your way of thinking or how what chains you think are more popular than others. But yeah, it's all in the data and it's all freely available. So happy hunting.
I love that. I guess from thank you both for getting us so hyped. We'd love to see it. We were really frustrated because we kind of knew what DeFi Llama should be showing, and it's nice to see it publicly reflected. That we took the spot that we think we deserve with those kind of times and the kind of affordability and security that you have with Across. Like this now all makes sense. And yeah, we just thank you guys for always choosing us and supporting us in the chat. Um, and from a marketing standpoint, again, we'll be seeing a lot more of these bullish data points coming out, little sneak peeks here and there before our big reveal. But other than that, I wanted to let you guys know that we started an ad campaign on Brave browser. I'm gonna just like ask you guys in the chat to let me know if anyone uses Brave. I just thought it was pretty easy idea to just try some paid advertisements since we haven't done any since Bankless podcast sponsorships. It's been quite a while since we've done some paid ads. So we're trying that. We're looking into doing more quests on like layer 3 and more on Galaxy just to get like, you know, Twitter followers up so that more people can, you know, learn about Across and know that we exist, because there are still people out there that don't, and that don't really use aggregators, so that aren't seeing the sort of affordability and uh, speed that or time that they can be saving by using us. So that's what we've been doing. Let me know if you've ever used Brave browser. It's been a while for me to use it, but some people on our team do. Be interested to see if anyone in the community does. That's pretty much it. This week we're gonna have an interview come out, meet the team. One of our front end engineers, Dongha, he actually gives my DeFi a shout out. So yeah, look out for that, my DeFi. He specifically shouted you out in that. And that's pretty much it. I guess we can bring on the Velodrome team to the chat. I see, or sorry, to the stage. I see Tao is here. I don't know if you want to request to speak. And I see Alex is also here. Okay, I see you. Of course. Okay, GR uses Brave. Well, turn on your push notifications on Brave browser and see if you see any cross advertisements on there. Okay, and Alex, you're here as well. Think we'd like to have Kevin. Yeah, Corpy is coming on stage as well. We'd love to have Corpy.
Do you see him there?
I'm sorry?
Do you see Kevin?
I see Corpy. I think Corpy raised hand. I think you can just like join the stage though, Corpy, if you'd like.
Yeah, I invited Corpy. I also invited Ryan. I don't see Kevin, so I'll give him a quick ping. Methodic, though. I see Methodic. I can invite. Right? Methodic was from Velodrome. Is that you? I'll invite them to speak. I might be putting them on the spot. Cool. I'll go send Kevin a quick message, see if he's coming.
Yeah, I've messaged him as well. I don't know if you want to give him a call, but hi guys. Corpy, if you could come on stage, that would be great. But why don't we just have the Velodrome team go ahead and introduce yourselves and introduce your proposal.
Hi all, I'm Tao. I'm part of the core team at Velodrome. First of all, I gotta say I love Across. I typically use Bungee. I don't know if you guys have used Bungee, sort of like the bridge aggregator, and I always get Across as the top option. It's the fastest, the cheapest, so it makes total sense.
Nice. Yeah, we just had an aggregator campaign and we had Bungie on not once but twice. That's how much we love them. So
Yeah,
yeah,
we
great.
love the good folks at Bungie. They're good peoples.
Yeah, I mean, we love aggregators as well for trading. I feel like eventually it's all going to be just aggregators, right? And we provide the underlying layer of infrastructure so that they can, be the kind of like the user experience maximizers. But yeah, I'm very happy to be here. Appreciate you guys having us over, and I'll let the rest of the guys introduce themselves.
Yeah, hello, and I'm Alex. I'm also on the core team of Velodrome. Like Tao, I work across a few different functions: biz dev, marketing, partnerships, operations, all that fun stuff.
Hey guys, Methodic here. Yes, I'm just on the biz dev team. Velodrome, probably Tal and Alex will be speaking a lot more during this AMA, but happy to plug in if needed. Excited to hopefully get you guys on Optimism.
Nice, thank you. I'm not sure what's going on, but for myself, like Methodic, I wasn't really able to hear you. Maybe just something up with your mic. I could just be just me
Okay.
as well. Let me know in chat, but yeah, really happy to have your team here with us. Thank you for joining our community call. And just want to say too, when you think optimism, you really only think Velodrome. Like, let's be honest. And from a marketing perspective, as a marketer, I've always been very impressed with your branding. I really like it, and I thought it was unique. For we had another kind of unique financial product, but very like artistic and aesthetic branding. And I think actually Velodrome was a pioneer of that. So yeah, just congratulations for all of your success. I know you guys must be working very, very hard. So we appreciate you taking the time and really explaining your proposal to us.
Yeah.
If you want to
Yeah.
take it away.
Yeah, I mean, I guess maybe first it would just be good just to maybe start with an introduction to Velodrome for anybody who's not familiar. So, Velodrome is the sort of leading decentralized exchange on Optimism and leading, I think, by several orders of magnitude in terms of TVL over Uniswap, Curve, Beethoven, and a bunch of others. And that also makes us the largest L2 DEX currently out there. So I think the main things to know about us is if you're familiar at all with Curve, we kind of work in a similar manner in that folks will come in and deposit incentives to basically get VE Velo voters, so those who have locked their Velo, to vote for their pairs, and then they direct Velo emissions to those pairs, which then LPs earn in order to sort of attract that liquidity. And then any fees that pool develops go to the voters, basically as sort of like a self-bribing mechanism. So the more volume that your pool is doing, the more fees that it is generating, the more votes that it will attract, the more emissions it will earn. So that's the more TVL it will develop. And if you didn't follow all of that, that's fine. The main line here is that it is the most capital efficient way for protocols to build liquidity on their token. And that's on L1 or L2. Velodrome consistently is one of, if not the most efficient ways to build liquidity. So I think, we initially reached out just because we saw an opportunity for you all to build additional liquidity on ACX on layer 2. And what we've put together in this proposal is sort of a plan to do that, whereby for a short period of time, you guys will basically pilot a liquidity incentivization program, basically bribing with ACX that directs emissions to your pool. And thus will sort of grow liquidity, and we would expect you to get a pretty substantial APR on that pair, which also gives the opportunity for holders to LP and stuff like that. A few other things to highlight in this. Well, I guess I'll say, I've seen in the conversation so far, there's like maybe a little bit of concern just around like token inflation. And I think the main thing to think about with a proposal like this is whatever, I'm not familiar necessarily with some of the core inflation or tokenomics, but basically the value of Velodrome is you are putting in, let's just say $1 worth of your token, and you are getting out 2 to 3 times the value in Velo tokens in emissions for LPs. So while you may be adding potentially some inflation in a pilot like this, you are basically directing more in dollar value and rewards towards holders than the tokens that you are entering. So from an inflationary standpoint, things like this actually make a lot of sense because overall the value return to token holders is going to be higher than whatever you are sort of putting in as incentives. Another thing I would call out is I think part of the idea here is that you guys would be depositing protocol owned liquidity that would then allow you to farm some of those Velo emissions. So that would be another return for the sort of DAO and community. And by virtue of locking those tokens and basically building a VE Velo position, you'll be in a position now to incentivize ACX liquidity on L2 without the need for token incentives and without the need for further emissions. So really, in a lot of ways, the Velodrome flywheel is designed to get DAOs out of the business of having to rely on liquidity incentives, period. And that sort of multiplier effect means as long as you sort of kick start the flywheel with some incentives, it'll be basically very capital efficient for you to build that position. And then over time, that position is the kind of thing that you can lean on to basically self-incentivize without the need for additional token emissions. So I think that's it at a high level. I don't know, Methodic or Tao, is there anything I sort of missed that you touch on?
I think you covered it really well. I mean, there's a couple of additional softer benefits. One is if you do follow this strategy and lock Velo, you will actually get if you saw an announcement yesterday, Aerodrome is going to launch on Base. Base is going to be the Coinbase layer 2 network. And there's going to be a Velodrome fork called Aerodrome that is going to airdrop a position, the initial distribution of the locked token to any holders of VE Velo. So it's basically going to be a kind of like grandfather in of any VE Velo holders into the Base ecosystem. And then there's another kind of a couple other softer benefits. One is when you bribe on Velodrome, you immediately get a lot of exposure to the Optimism community because of the voting system. Your pool will appear basically at the top because it's going to be a new pool bribing. And then once incentives like Velo emissions start flowing into your pool, the same thing. It's going to appear at the top of the APR table. And it's going to call a lot of attention. The community will sort of see the new pool, pay attention to the ACX token, and consider LPing, or becoming involved in the community. And when I think about also the prospect of holding a token, I personally find it much easier to do so on a layer 2 because I know that buying the token, adding liquidity. And then in case I need to remove it or whatever, it's going to be cheap. So there's not as much of a bigger barrier of entry. Whereas on mainnet, anytime I think about getting a token on mainnet, I definitely have to consider the fees because, otherwise the cost of the fees alone to get the token and LP is very likely going to reduce or eliminate any upside of holding that token. So we do think there's a lot of benefit of having presence on L2s for your users, and just kind of we are tremendously bullish on the prospect of the growth of layer 2s in the next wave of users coming onto DeFi. So I think it's a really good moment to basically start building some presence there and making moves into kind of this new era of DeFi growth.
Yeah, I actually do want to emphasize what Tao said there, because given the announcement we made yesterday, especially over the period of this pilot, the additional benefit is that you have the ability, in locking VE Velo, you'd essentially be also building an across position in VE Arrow, which will be the sort of primary DEX of the Base ecosystem. And we are very, very, very bullish on Base. There's going to be a lot, I think, coming out that I think will turn everybody else very, very bullish on Base as well. But it's kind of a 2-for-1 right now where you're getting, a position that can incentivize liquidity for the long term on Velodrome. on Optimism, and Velodrome's plan is basically to extend into the superchain and be the DEX of the superchain. And for this period before the base or airdrome snapshot, you're also basically getting a DAO airdrop of Arrow tokens as well. So it's just a way of saying, especially if you think about this in terms of a pilot of let's test it, let's see how it works, and then we can make a decision whether or not to continue it or end it. The aerodrome airdrop in there, I think, removes all of the risk. The worst case scenario is you guys walk away with a Velo position and an Arrow position, and the ROI is probably pretty great, even if you don't continue the strategy.
I don't have that much more to add, actually. I think Tal and Alex did a really good job. By the way, can you hear me properly?
We can hear you, although it's a little soft. I don't know if perhaps you were a little far from the mic.
Yeah, maybe. I'll just try and speak a bit louder. But yeah, and I think in the proposal that we drafted up and posted, we didn't include the information about our aerodrome initiative. So that's as Tal and Alex mentioned, that's really it sort of makes the whole pilot there really isn't much risk to you guys, because you end up with that ability to incentivize on base, and I think a lot of people are actually not realizing the magnitude of such an opportunity, especially because Coinbase have, I think, 110 million plus users and about 80 billion in TVL / assets under management, and these numbers actually dwarf those numbers which we see in DeFi today. So it is sort of a no strings attached pilot. 10 weeks, I think, is what we proposed, and yeah, curious to hear if you guys had any specific questions or concerns outside of what we tried to cover.
Yeah, I did see one come up. Somebody asked about the Velo inflation rate. So maybe Tao, do you want to speak to Velo inflation, the rebases, fees, all that?
Yeah, so Velo follows a basically linear emission schedule, whereby it started off at 4%. I think now it must be about 2% of the supply per week. No, less so. I think it's now running at a basically 50% inflation per year. So it's like 1% per week, and it decays at 0.1% per week as well. So like the emissions are basically coming down over time, but it has also the other side of the flywheel, which is people that farm Velo lock it to become voters. So again, if you are a voter, you get all the bribes and get all the fees that the pool you vote for accumulates. So there's this incentive to vote for the most productive pools, the ones that will have the most volume or the most fees, or the combination of both. And fees at the moment are very low. They're at 0.5 or 0.4%, depending on the pool. With Velodrome V2, which we're going to release basically next week, protocols will be able to establish or set whatever fee rate they want for their own pool. I think for a cross, if it creates a pool, it would probably be best to have either a 1% or a 0.3% fee level, so that one, it has a bit of a disincentive to sell the token. And if it does, if there is some volume, then that is captured to attract voters. So if there's some trading activity, the fees are accumulated, and then voters will see those fees and vote for the pool to direct more emissions to that pool. Basically, they get the fees and they send Velo emissions in return. And as Alex mentioned, every dollar that is distributed to voters typically results in about $2 of velo emissions to that pool. So the same with fees. Every dollar in fees that is captured tends to attract enough votes to direct about $2 of velo emissions to the pool. So that makes the pool either deeper in terms of like TVL or more attractive to LPs with higher APRs for anybody that wants to LP the across token.
I had a question which I'll ask sort of naively, but it sounds to me a bit similar, or like it resonates a bit with the setup we have on mainnet right now, which is that we bribe on Aura to deepen our balancer liquidity pool. Is it what are the differences between what you folks propose and Aura, if you're familiar and able to speak to that?
Yeah, it's basically a very similar model, except Velodrome is fully integrated. You bribe on Velodrome, you LP on Velodrome, you trade on Velodrome. So it's all in the same place, in the same app. And we continue improving the app itself. So again, we're releasing V2 next week, which will have a bunch of basically technical improvements that will make it kind of like the most, from my opinion, the most complete integrated system for incentives. And it is, but in terms of like the incentives and the mechanics itself, it's very similar to Aura connected with Balancer.
Another difference is actually, I think on Aura, there's, certain boosts that, you might be able to get. And it's a little bit more complicated if you look at how, the relationship Aura has with Balancer. Whereas, when on Velodrome, like Tal was saying, it's a bit more simplified, all on one sort of application. And, the APR that you see on the UI is the APR that you'll get. So you won't need to sort of try and calculate, what kind of boost you'll be getting and stuff. So that's another difference.
Hey guys, I had one question. How consistent is that dollars or emissions per dollar bribed? And do you have a history of that over time? I think I might have asked this in the past.
Yeah, I mean, we've been around for over a year now, and it's always kind of been in that range of somewhere between 1.5 and 3.5 if you want to take the full range, but generally around 2 to 3. But yeah.
And do you have a historical graph or some kind of history of this?
I mean, we have data, and we have got real-time data, and I mean, I don't know if we've ever necessarily graphed it, but I don't know, Tal.
We could pull it up. I can share the Dune dashboard that tracked it for this week. I'll share it in the chat. And so this here you can see the value of emissions, the value of bribes deposited, and sort of like the conversion of emissions per bribe. And this one includes on the bribe value, it includes the match that we provide with OP, and which tends to be for most protocols about 15%. We match 15% of their bribe. So for protocols, the conversion of emissions for bribe is so like it's 15% higher basically for most of these pairs. So most of these pairs get very close to 2 or at least 2, and some, as you can see, are much higher.
As a more general question, how do projects think about splitting liquidity between mainnet and L2? I think one of the concerns that we might have is that, we've developed a decent pool on mainnet, and now we're kind of creating a separate pool that's not really connected with that pool. Yeah, I was wondering if you had any thoughts on that, or how other projects thought about it, or how they distributed their bribes or incentives.
Yeah. I mean, I'd say generally speaking, one thing that we've seen is that protocols will just seek the places where they can get the most capital efficient return, and build the deepest liquidity. And so that's meant, I think, a lot of folks who are maybe incentivizing on a few different chains or incentivizing on mainnet are basically like slowly transitioning their pools, to the places where they're getting the best ROI. And so that means like increasingly L2, and that has definitely meant like increasingly Velodrome. But more generally speaking, what I would say is we are seeing with, with almost every protocol we work with, is that they are all putting into action plans to migrate as quickly as possible, liquidity, operations, everything that they possibly can off of L1 and onto L2. Because of course all the gas benefits and things like that, but also just that sort of knowledge that this is the future, and by getting everything migrated to L2 sooner, that there will be sort of an advantage in being an early mover there, and like what we're describing, right, in the ability like to almost at no cost, right, build Velo positions, build Arrow positions, be positioned for the super chain. Protocols who have been doing that work for the last year, and in the next year, the sort of transition and the upside of L2 growth is going to be very much theirs. So, there's a few laggards out there, I think, and I definitely think there are some incumbents who maybe are also maybe just did well enough in the last bull run that they just don't even really give a shit. But I think for folks who are really hungry and positioning themselves for the next wave of DeFi and crypto, it is like get to L2 as fast as we possibly can. And of course, the other thing, of course, to mention is just that like the Optimism Foundation and the grants process is there to help you do it. So it's another thing that you have the ability to tap into. The sooner you get engaged on L2s, you can get support for driving adoption or that transition, etc.
I just want to add one more question. What are your, I guess, maybe thoughts, or maybe describe some of the differences between, say, your like the way your AMM runs versus, say, a regular Uni v2 type AMM, and also is there any kind of, I guess maybe the future upgrades that would make it more like a Uni v3? I'm assuming you're more like Uni v2. Is there any kind of thoughts in the future of how your AMM would upgrade for any capital efficiencies?
Yeah. Excuse me. Sorry. So yeah, at the moment the pools are basically a Uni v2 style pool, but we are very actively working on concentrated liquidity / Uni v3 style pools, which we will release in the next few months, ideally as soon as possible. And perhaps to your point on what makes sense for the having the deepest liquidity on one position. One thing that, again, in terms of user experience that I've noticed is just the ability to add liquidity at a low cost on an L2. It just feels so good compared to kind of mainnet. Again, because you know that if you add liquidity on mainnet, it's just going to cost you $100 round trip to add and remove. So again, in terms of user experience, community experience, it is much nicer to be able to provide liquidity in it too. And yes, we're bringing concentrated liquidity pools very soon. And I guess maybe last point is, when you think about the value of having deep liquidity is basically to provide users with low slippage trading experience, right? Being able to either acquire or sell the across token easily without eating too much slippage. But that also includes the fees, right, in terms of the slippage itself. So similarly with adding liquidity on L2s, when you trade, the fee itself is much lower. So the slippage you can, if you include the full cost of a trade, it's also much lower. If you want to buy $500 of st-acx at the moment on mainnet, that that's going to cost you 10% of your acquisition on fees alone. So that's another. It's basically eating a 10% slippage if you buy $500 of st-acx. So that's a huge advantage of being an L2 as well.
Yeah.
Thanks for that.
Yes.
Is it so with you like a concentrated liquidity style? How would bribing work then? How are people incentivized, and how do you reward people, I guess?
So the goal is to design it in such a way that the briber only needs to choose the pool and the fee, and then the LPs will get rewarded. So like a percentage of the emissions that go to the pool based on the time they spend in the active range. So they can choose how narrow or how wide they want to provide liquidity to, and based on the a combination of how narrow their position is, the LP position is, and how much time they are in the active range, they will get a larger or lower percentage of the emissions. But for the briber itself is just going to be the one pool with the fee level, and there will also be an option for an EC liquidity provision. If you don't want to be actively managed your position, you can just provide it to either to the full range, or depending on the solution that we come up with, some kind of range that moves over time. But the experience itself, we're trying to make it as simple as possible.
Awesome. Any other questions from you, Kevin or Corpy? You've been silent over there. Anything you wanted to ask?
I think I'm good. I feel like I dominated that a little bit. So yeah, I think others should feel free to ask questions.
They were great questions, Kevin.
I'm gonna promote myself for just 1 second as speaker. Do you have a ballpark of what people are currently bribing on Velodrome? So how would that compare to what we're currently bribing on Aura?
In terms of bribes on Velodrome, it's basically the full range. We have some protocols bribing the equivalent of, $500 per week, and others that are going full on and bribing up to 20,000, the equivalent of 20,000 USD per week. The system is efficient enough that they basically all get a relatively similar level of emissions based up on a per dollar basis, just because voters will ask, collectively distribute their votes so that it's basically about even for protocols. But there's no ideal, or there's no perfect amount of bribes. It's more about what is the resulting liquidity that you get. And that's a combination, of course, of, APRs for the pool, how much, how willing liquidity providers are to add liquidity to your pool. When there's a new project, for example, APRs tend to be very high. So, the emissions have to be very high as well to maintain a high level of liquidity. And yeah, we do have Stargate bribing. I want to remember how much they're bribing. Do you remember Methodic?
It's 25K a week, I think.
Yeah, around 25K, I think it is.
That's super helpful. Thank you.
Sure thing.
I have a governance related question, which is, so when you provide liquidity and presumably stake, right? Do you receive a token in response to that? Because we use Snapshot for governance, so I would need to go back in and add a custom strategy to be able to honor somebody's position within Velodrome for voting purposes. And so I guess I'm wondering the complexity of that, how we would need to break that down. But I assume that you guys have experience with other protocols who have had to do the same thing. Can you speak to that at all?
Yeah, you do get an LP token when you're at liquidity. And we'd be very happy to help you pull the data on any staked positions by wallet addresses. I don't know of protocols that have specifically integrated staked LPs into their voting process so that it's automatic. But yeah, it is easy to get the data and kind of break down the wallets by, the wallets of liquidity providers by balances as well.
Okay, cool. Yeah, when we set this up with our internal staked st-acx process, because it doesn't emit a token back to you when you stake, and so we had to go into Snapshot and create a custom strategy to be able to recognize that in people's voting balances. So that's just something for us to keep in mind. Basically, right now, I saw somebody asked in the chat if voting on L2s counts. And right now the answer is no, but that's because we haven't decided to make that a priority. There hasn't been any really use case on an L2 before this. Sorry for the background noise of the kiddos. We haven't had any use case on an L2 yet, and so we haven't really had enough st-acx on those chains to support L2 voting. But this would obviously change that, so that's just another moving part to consider.
I think the kids like the prospect of going to L2s.
The kids love the prospects of going to L2s. They're excited.
Amazing.
It's either that or the Cinnamon Toast Crunch.
Yeah, that too.
They are here for it.
I wouldn't mind that.
Kirby has a question, which I'll actually go ahead and ask. He probably can't unmute. So, do you have any stats metrics on what % of volume is from market makers or arbitrageurs versus end users? Not perfect to measure, of course, but just wondering if you have anything.
Unfortunately, not yet. That's a good question, but we haven't pulled that data. What we do know is that a lot of the volume comes from aggregators. So that's why we sort of focus on building the liquidity and let the aggregators flow the trades through us.
Awesome. I just got the tap from Amanda that it's time to move to sort of the next section, which is talking about st-acx utility suggestions. And so that might tie in here as well. Amanda, you had a list of questions that you wanted to ask about there. Oh, here you go. What about making a certain amount of st-acx tokens mandatory to act as a relayer? Okay, so this, I guess these questions are less so Velodrome specific. These are just like general topics of conversation. So I guess what I'll do then is invite whoever wants to stay up on stage. If this is of interest to you guys to talk about, I totally welcome you to stay. Otherwise, since this is a bit of a transition, I'll go ahead and say just big shout out to Velodrome Team for coming on today. Thank you so much for taking the time to be here, and feel free to drop if this isn't like a section of interest for you guys. So yeah, big round of applause for the Velodrome Team. Thank you guys.
Thanks for having us, and yeah, let us know if any other questions come up or if there's anything we can do to help.
Yeah, totally. Actually, I do have one more question before we transition. So I know you guys have a proposal up. What kind of like timeline are you looking before you would want to post something to Snapshot for an official vote? I think you were hoping for maybe a little bit more engagement and feedback, but I can poke folks with a certain amount of urgency if you have a timeline in mind there.
We don't have a specific timeline right now, but I guess because it's been up there for about 2 weeks or so. So, I mean, we're happy for it to go to Snapshot, say in the next week or so. What do you guys think, Tal, Alex?
Yeah, whenever, if you guys think it's ready for a vote, we'd be happy to put it up. I mean, Velodrome V2 launches June 15th, so maybe on that week, it could be a good week to get started. Or, again, we don't have a specific time, but whenever it works for you guys as well.
Okay, cool. Well, I guess for our community, stay tuned for an announcement on that, just sort of encouraging folks to go participate in the forum, give your feedback, whether you're for or against it, or ask for, clarifying questions if you have them. So, yep, one more time, round of applause for our Velodrome folks. Thank you guys very much for being here today.
Thank you so much for having us.
Yeah, sure
Thanks,
thing.
Tal. Take care.
Awesome. So now talking about ACX utility questions. These were all brought on by our community. And I think some of these might be more product focused. So I'm going to go ahead and invite some more of the team up here. Feel free to speak or not speak, but some of these might actually be like technical or engineering questions in the end. But they've gotten a lot of traction in the community. So I figure it's good to just discuss it. So one line of questioning that we saw a few times was, what about making certain amount of ACX tokens mandatory to act as a relayer? And that was from zkPantani, as well as a couple others. But the idea there would be basically relayers would stake a certain amount of ACX tokens. Have we considered that as a potential utility for ACX? And do we have any initial thoughts on it?
I think Amanda sent out a list of ideas or for us to think about, and I thought there was an interesting theme with all the ideas that the community brought up, and I think the theme is that there seems to be good value in being a relayer, but that value, I mean, these relayers are probably part of our community, but that value seems to be almost taken externally. And I feel like a lot of the suggestions or a lot of these ideas come around the idea of like taking that value and bringing it back to either the bridge user or to the LP or some kind of value back to the token holder. So like the idea of like staking to be a relayer would be benefiting or taking some of that value back away from relayer and giving it to the actual protocol itself. I think there were some ideas maybe of like, somehow providing that to the LPs, but I do see a theme of people basically recognizing their value in relaying and then trying to take some of that value and give it back to the across community. So yes, I think I just wanted to highlight that, and then maybe from there we can think about like how do we distribute that value, and maybe I think the rest of the team probably has better insights in how relaying works, and could probably comment on it.
Yeah, so my guess is that most of the relayers now would satisfy whatever criteria we proposed. I'd actually maybe argue that that's not the best use of the across token, because the relayers are actually like, yes, they extract some value, but they also add a lot of value. So that stat Dylan was sharing earlier today about the number, like how fast our transfers are, that's only possible because like Labs actually doesn't relay most of our transactions. Out that our like decentralized relayers do almost all of the work, and I think that adds like value, but they also add a lot of value, I think.
Yeah, I would be interested to hear a breakdown on that because I often wonder, like, there's a lot of value in the Risk Labs relayer because it can facilitate the really big transfers. But it's becoming more and more idle as the community relayers start to do more work on the smaller transfers. So it would be interesting to see that breakdown of like percent filled by Risk Labs in terms of like number of transactions, right? I think that would be interesting.
I would just say, sorry, can you all hear me?
Yeah.
Cool. The only thing I'd add is that like, it's like, this is kind of also hard to check for, and like, you would need relayers to kind of have balances on every chain to be able to actually check this at the smart contract level. So it is a little bit like technically messy to try to check something like this. I think going back to what Kevin said about having the like being able to point the value in different directions. Relayers obviously need to be paid for their efforts, or nobody will relay. I think the question is, how do we design a system where we can slice up the excess, and give a fair amount to the relayers, but also give, some back to the protocol, some to the LPs, etc. And the LP fees and stuff like that are already kind of baked in, so that's already there. But a question, like, I think bringing more back to the protocol, like doing this really efficiently, I think would involve more of an auction type setup, some sort of way that relayers can do real time, like you can auction off the rights for relays in real time. And I think the challenge there is just doing that really fast, being able to kind of keep relay speeds really high while still kind of auctioning off the rights and taking the kind of excess value generated by that auction and giving some back to the protocol. So I think that becomes more of a kind of incentives plus technological problem that needs to be solved. But that's kind of where my head goes when we talk about like trying to accrue fees back to the protocol or figure out more optimal ways of splitting up fees. And to be clear, I'm not super worried about the value going to the relayers today. I'm actually more worried about what the relayers are paying to like validators and to to the sequencers on L2s and stuff for priority. So relayers ultimately have to pay to be the first relayer, and they compete. And so the kind of the end result of them competing on speed is that they pay, that most of the excess money they generate actually goes to the kind of validators on the blockchain and doesn't go back to the protocol. It doesn't go back to them either. And we've heard a lot of complaints from relayers that like they feel like they're spending a lot of money trying to compete with each other rather than kind of getting that money in fees. So ultimately, those user fees are not going back to the protocol; they're going to the blockchain itself, which kind of is suboptimal.
Yeah, that's an interesting point, Matt. So I think like imagine a world where everything was running perfectly. Would you kind of agree that we would need to solve the problem of like first like making sure that the relayer competition factor of like that is going to the validators, so removing that as issue part one, and then from there figuring out if there's like excess in relayers that ought to be going back to the protocol via some kind of like staking mechanism or an auction or a bid to fill relays.
Yeah, I mean, I think both these problems kind of have the same solution, which is the protocol needs to have some, like, you need to have some sort of auction process, and you need to have the results of that auction be kind of divvied up, and like the that auction allows the protocol to take that excess, kind of the bids that the relayers place. So whatever's remaining would go to the relayers, but then you have to the protocol would need to figure out what to do with kind of the proceeds from that auction. So a relayer bids $5 for a relay that they're going to make $7 off of. So the relayer, that kind of auction process has already determined how much the relayer should get, and it should be a fairly, it should be a competitive amount, right? Because the other relayers would bid higher if they thought that was they could manage it. So yeah, that should be a fairly, should get minimized, the amount that the relayers take. But then you have that $5 they bidded, and today that's going to validators, but tomorrow that, if the auction process isn't run on the, in Flashbots or on the blockchain, it's actually run in some separate venue for a cross specifically, you could imagine that revenue going somewhere else. And that's the revenue that I think is really interesting. I think the relayers are naturally going to kind of compete away a lot, any excess profits that they make beyond kind of, whatever is reasonable. Just like you see this in kind of other gas price auctions as well. Like, MEV searchers also, in really competitive MEV searching, where people are trying to sandwich or are trying to front run trades on the blockchain, right? You'll have people, you'll have a lot of the excess profits generated by that get competed away, so that most of the excess profits actually end up going to the validators and not going to the actual searchers themselves who find these opportunities. And so that's kind of the same process that will happen.
Yeah. So is this something that's possible to build, or how complex would this be, and would it affect the bridge in any way in terms of speed or cost?
Like, I think
Or
that's the
too
problem.
early?
I don't think it would affect the bridge in terms of cost. The kind of quoting mechanism could stay exactly the same. I think the complexity is like trying to build an auction system that is very fast, is like, that doesn't affect speed. But yeah, so I think that's the real challenge, and yeah, I think it is possible to build. I think this is kind of similar to what's happening to what Flashbots has built for kind of but more specific to a cross. So like, Flashbots is this really general system for doing these sorts of auctions, and they do them in real time for blocks that happen every 12 seconds. So you can do these pretty fast, but I think the technological infrastructure to make that happen is fairly complicated, and we have to be. I think the protocol needs to be thoughtful about how that's implemented and developed to not introduce things like centralization, where you have one person running a server that performs the auction. If that server goes down or decides that they really like one relayer rather than another relayer, they can start censoring and stuff like that. So you have to be really careful about things like centralization when you build systems like this. But like, building fast auction processes is definitely possible. Like, every Google ad you see is the result of kind of a very fast auction process. So yeah, it's definitely possible. It's just complicated to do it in a decentralized way.
Great. Did you want to invite any of the community members up with these ideas to kind of share it, or kind of react to some of the answers from the team?
Yeah, sorry, I didn't realize I was muted there. I was talking to myself. Yeah, I could. I see roundmound is out there. Roundmound, do you wanna? I'm gonna invite you up on stage, in case you want to speak.
Because I feel like it touches a lot of roundmound's ideas, I think.
Yeah, roundmound had him, and also let's see, there was a couple others. I don't see him out there. Yeah, I don't see the folks who I think had questions. Oh, roundmound can't join. But yeah, that's all kind of interesting thoughts. I wonder, like, just more generally speaking, what the value, or like Matt, you talked about doing that auctioning in kind of a decentralized way. It's interesting to think about like the decentralization impacts on our like end users versus our relayers. Like I think there are like different values and sets of trust assumptions maybe at play within those two different groups, and it's interesting to think about. I'd be curious your take on, like, just playing devil's advocate for a moment, how important actually is decentralizing the auctioning process for relayers?
I think it's very important. If you don't decentralize, like, let's imagine that Amanda like ran the server that did the auction process, and only Amanda could like kind of submit the results on chain. Then Amanda could just run a relayer and censor everyone else, not let anybody else put in bids, and then she could bid 0 for everything, and then she would take all of the profits from that auction process, and then like the kind of this auction excess, or the kind of the revenue of that auction process that's supposed to go back to the protocol or supposed to go back to the user as a discount or whatever, you would get no revenue out of that. So like a centralized auction process is really bad because of censorship, because that person can that centralized auctioneer can basically take all of the profits for themselves. And yeah, so it kind of defeats the purpose, I would say. Now, like maybe you can assume that like that person is honest or something, but like I think in the crypto world, we assume an adversarial environment and that people are going to take what they can get. So I think generally you don't want that sort of centralized auction process for that reason.
Yeah, I would keep questioning, but Matt, I just saw that you said you had to go right before I asked you that question. So thanks for hanging out a couple extra minutes and for joining us.
Sure.
Cool. Yeah, I think we kind of covered all the questions. I mean, they were all broadly based on the subject of like staking ACX for relayers. Amanda, were there any that you thought we missed?
I think there was a question about using ACX as a bribe token.
Oh, that's right. I missed that one.
Yeah. I think there's pieces of questions everywhere in the chat. I think that was actually one of the original ideas we had for when we first released the token proposal. Like this is pre-token. I do think it's definitely a possibility. I think it's just figuring out what the right design would be. If I'm getting this right, I think the general idea would be almost like a VE style type token where you could stake the ACX, you would get some kind of governance power, and that would allow, I guess, in some ways to dictate where, for example, where missions would go for our pools. So that would help decide, which tokens would get prioritized. But I think there's also a possibility of prioritizing which L2s or which destinations we would we would bridge to more, which we would incentivize. So there's a possibility of doing that as well. I don't know exactly what the design would be, but it's definitely a possibility, and it would be I would think that'd be designed very similar to what's out there now, like a VE style thing. You can share in some revenue, you can dictate some of the or dictate the direction of the bridge and what you would want it to do.
And it's an interesting idea. I kind of struggle to envision how that would work, or like, yeah, specifically like what people would be bribing. Like, would they be bribing increased LP fees on some destination chain, or like, yeah, I guess I'm not clear on that. But I know that you had an initial vision for that, Kevin. So that's kind of cool that it came up again.
I think maybe what it would be is you could probably find a way to change fees. So we might have parameters that could change fees on a certain direction. And if the state ACX holders decided that there's like maybe there's a new L2 that we're supporting that, and we want to direct all flows or help direct flows in that direction, then fees could go to zero for that period of time. And then maybe every couple weeks these things change, or maybe and if we're using the bribing mechanism, it could be that this new L2, or maybe it could be an existing L2, could say that they're bribing a certain amount to drive ACX holders to lower fees, yeah, or down, or like, or just, yeah. I think it can be multiple things that can be done, or it could change the mission schedule, and instead of ACX going to certain or split between a few assets, it can be split. It can be more directed to one thing, but I mean, it's very flexible. I'm not really providing many details, but you can design in multiple ways to kind of drive these different kind of governance related parameters.
Interesting. Amanda, I think agenda-wise, you had a couple things you still wanted to get to. Like, we still have a spin the wheel game that we'll end with, but then I saw somebody or a couple people asked to hear an update from Ryan. Ryan, do you have the ability to unmute and give a quick product update?
Yeah, was there a specific question?
You're kind of fuzzy for me. I don't know if that's the case for everybody else. Can you say that one more time?
What was there a specific question?
I think it was just can we hear an update from Ryan, as well as would love to hear some thoughts on strategy for supporting other tokens once UBA is launched. So just general product update on where we're at and what we're thinking.
Yeah, I feel like still in development of UBA. I think it's a little delay versus when we kind of thought we would launch, but it is kind of a completely new system, so we do want to take a very high level of attention and care to this launch, and we're not taking any shortcuts or speeding anything up at the risk of that. But yeah, I mean, it's going well, and I think we've stated this before, but you know, the way this kind of launch will go is we will launch, we'll deploy VBA with production. And what that means is there will be a new pricing system for across. End users won't notice it, but there will be changes to how the system prices and there's implemented and basically deployed that to our existing teams that we're on today. Ensure that everything's working fine, and then do a launch to ZK Sync era after that. And so that's kind of the order of operations there. I don't have a great timeline yet to share, but like we are nearing the stage where we can start to deploy UBA to production to mainnet and test on our existing chains. We're not there yet, but we are nearing those final stages. And depending on kind of how that goes, to launch GK Sync. And yeah, rough order of priority. It's like everyone's welcome to share their thoughts, make proposals, etc. on like what chains we go to. But in my mind, it's a mix of a few things. First is probably like hype and first mover advantage. I don't think there is hype and potential for first mover advantage, especially for the type of service a user can get using across and getting to ZK Sync. So like we do prioritize ZK Sync at the highest. Depending on when base is ready to go live, we may prioritize directly after ZK Sync. But we also look at like what other volumes out there in the market already that we can capture, and there's like 20 to 30% of the total industry, the total volume and bridging, is going to or from land to BNB chains. That's a lot. It's way bigger than ZK base. Not as much hype, of course, but there's still a lot to capture there. And so those are kind of the next two on the list after ZK Sync and base. In terms of tokens, we've launched STT. We plan to support st-acx. We're still figuring out some minor details or fine details about it. After that, I don't see like a ton of value. Plus, like adding the token in terms of the capital requirements is all taken care of by that project that wants their token to be added. And there's like multiple layers of that. So it's not just that a token project can provide relayer capital and for the LP capital and layer potentially, but also it's like there needs to be some level of demand for that token across chain, and so we do want to see that too. So outside of like USDT, which we've already added, and SNX, which we plan to add, there's not a little bit out there. We're watching close.
Awesome. Well, thanks for that, Ryan. So good things to come in the coming couple of weeks. Were there any other quick? Yeah, Amanda, good call. Let's transition to our game. Do you want to try unmuting yourself real quick and tell us what you're gonna do? Okay. All right. Looks like Amanda can't speak, so I'll have to speak for her, which is gonna be funny because she's doing the wheel. So she's added all the call participants to this wheel, and she's gonna spin it now. And then Amanda, what does that person win? Mint Man. I wonder if they are here still. Nope, no Mint Man. Let's spin again. While it's spinning, Amanda, tell me what they win so that I make sure to tip them the right amount. Ooh, I don't know how to say that name, but I know they were just here. Let's see. Yeah, still here. They're still here. Awesome. Congratulations. I won't try to butcher your name with the spelling, but you're our winner today. So I will send you your tip in general. So keep an eye out for that via tip bot. And yeah, I guess with that, $25 in ACX. Nice. Congratulations to you. Is there anything else, Amanda, before we go ahead and wrap it up? Okay, awesome. Well, with that, I'm going to go ahead and invite our music bot back online, and we'll send it out with a nice little closing song for you guys. So thank you all for coming today. This was a good conversation. I appreciated the conversation on ACX as well as like utility and liquidity and all that stuff. Thank you to Velodrome. Thank you to our team for making the time to come today. Appreciate all of you for being here. Hope you all have a wonderful rest of your week, and we'll catch you next time.